Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started, everyone. Thanks to everyone who's joined us. My name is Emily Silence. I'm our development associate here at Potomac Riverkeeper Network. Today we're going to be talking about harmful algal blooms in the Shenandoah River. As you can see, I do kind of have a bit of a cold, so I'm going to refrain from talking a little bit more today and let our lovely staff do much of the presenting. So we'll be joined today by our Vice President of Programs and Litigation, Philip Musigis, and Mark Frondorf, who is our Shenandoah Riverkeeper. Just for a little housekeeping, I do have everyone on mute right now. Please type any questions in the chat box, and we'll have time at the end to kind of go over them. So Philip, if you want to go ahead and kick us off a little bit.
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody. I guess it's afternoon now. So I'm Philip Musigis. I'm Vice President here at Potomac Riverkeeper Network. And I'm just going to talk for a minute about our organization generally, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mark to talk about the Shenandoah. So I think many of you probably are familiar with us, but for those of you who are not, we are Potomac Riverkeeper Network is a network of 3 riverkeepers. And we are our mission is pretty straightforward. Our mission is to protect the public's right to clean water in the Potomac and the Shenandoah Rivers. And as many of you know, we work in a very large watershed. We're watershed focused. That's about a 14,000 square mile area. And so we have Mark Frondorf as our Shenandoah Riverkeeper, and then we have an Upper Potomac and a Potomac Riverkeeper who work on that river, basically from the headwaters up in West Virginia all the way down to the bay. And what we're going to talk about today is a good example of kind of how we use different tools in our toolbox to work towards improving water quality, protecting riverfront communities. We use a lot of different tools. We use legal enforcement, litigation, policy work at the legislative level, at the state and federal level, and grassroots work. We have grassroots campaigns that have successfully worked on coal ash pollution in Virginia, on sewage pollution around the watershed. And last thing I'll mention is we have a really wonderful kind of outreach program where we involve citizens and volunteers in a lot of different ways. We have a citizen-based water quality monitoring program. We have, I think, 27 sites now on the Potomac River where we do weekly sampling in the summertime for bacteria levels, and we report that out to the public on a great app called the Swim Guide. We're hoping to expand that through the whole watershed, start doing that in Shenandoah and the Upper Potomac. And we do monthly trash cleanups in the summer. We've got a trash campaign. So we really try to work on all of the issues, hopefully that affect our rivers and our communities, again, that people who use the rivers. And I will turn it over to Mark. He's going to talk about harmful algal blooms and our work to address nutrient pollution in the Shenandoah. So thank you.
Thanks, Philip.
Yep.
So let's just get right to it. I'm just going to give a real brief history lesson on some of our algal bloom work, talk about what's been going on this season, the advisory, what we're doing about it, and what we need you to do about it to help us out. So in terms of the history, this harmful algal blooms go all the way back to 2004, 2005, when in the Shenandoah there was a major fish kill that took place, and it probably eliminated about 90% of the black bass and smallmouth bass and bluegills and sunfish. And it was thought that it's possible that a harmful algal bloom occurred, or that during a algae die-off, there was a creation of hypoxia, a lack of oxygen in the water that resulted in the fish kill. None of that was proved. There was no silver bullet, and work still goes on regarding the fish kill and some of those issues. But nonetheless, we started looking at it very, very seriously back then. And we've been trying, and we went through 3 iterations of the impaired waters list, which is a list that the state submits to the EPA, trying to get the Shenandoah River, all 3 reaches, the North Fork, South Fork, and Main Stem, put on the impaired waters list for nutrient overload or nuisance algae. When we first did it, DEQ came back and said there are no numeric limits for nutrient standards on free-flowing streams. And so we have nothing to judge it against. And so then we went back again and we presented probably a couple hundred letters from anglers and hikers and tubers and paddlers and just recreational folks that enjoy swimming in the river, stating that their use and enjoyment of the river has been impaired as a result of these heavy algal blooms. And DEQ came back and essentially said that that is too subjective, even though the Clean Water Act says that impaired waters list can be judged either with nutrient or with numeric limits or with a narrative standard. And the EPA upheld those, the submission of those lists for 3 cycles. And so in 2017, we submitted I'm not certain why this is not. So in 2017, we submitted in district court a suit addressing it. And when you look at it, this is a sentence that was written back in 2017, but it could have been written, back in July or August, just talking about the severity of algal blooms in the river and what we're encountering and its impact upon recreation and tourism and outdoor enjoyment. And so that was in 2017. We lost that suit, and then we appealed in 2019, and again we lost. But nonetheless, if we were going to lose anywhere, I would prefer to lose in the court, because even as a result of our lawsuits, it compelled DEQ to start doing something. And so they stood up the Shenandoah River Algae Methodology Study, and they started looking at what's going on in the Shenandoah and seriously looking at it. And then concurrent with that is we undertook a large project, the Shenandoah Watershed Compact, where we brought together the major stakeholders in the river, outfitters and government folks, state and federal, or state and local, paddlers and anglers, all looking at what we could do to improve the Shenandoah watershed. And out of that came a document, this document, and it was more introspective in nature, looking at what each of the communities could be doing to improve and protect the watershed. And so from this document, we created our Respect the Shenandoah campaign. And the Respect the Shenandoah campaign looks primarily at algal outbreaks, and we use the Water Reporter. And Water Reporter is an app that you can put on your smartphone, and you're paddling down the river or you're fishing, and you see something that doesn't look quite right, and you can snap a photo of it. You can write a short blurb, and then you just hit send, and it goes off, and it comes to us, and it identifies it geocaches the coordinates of where this photo was taken, and all the little circles down there are reports of algal blooms, on the North Fork, South Fork, and on the main stem of the Shenandoah. And so we started using that and submitting it to DEQ as well as to Virginia Department of Health. And this is a picture that was taken in July of this year, and over on the North Fork, and you can see just heavy bottom dwelling algae just blanketing the bottom. And what you don't see are any fish or anything, because it makes it very difficult when you have this blanket of algae, regardless if it's a harmful algal bloom or not. Just the severity of the algae itself is enough to force fish to have to move. Smallmouth bass, lots of fish use subaquatic vegetation as nurseries for their fish, and they can't survive in this environment. And then also in this year, what actually started last year too, and probably just about this time last year, where we had a meeting with DEQ, and the director of DEQ, David Paler, said that DEQ was getting ready to announce nutrient standards for the Shenandoah River. And that got pushed back from late fall. It was going to be the end of the year, and it got merged into Virginia's triennial review water quality standard assessment. And so in May of this year, it was announced that DEQ was going to develop Shenandoah Chlorophyll A standards, and Chlorophyll A was going to be a stand-in for nitrogen and phosphorus as a suitable judge for the amount of nutrients that we're finding in the river system. And so this is going on. Philip Musigas, he sits on this panel. I'm his alternate looking at these Chlorophyll A standards. It's important to keep in mind as this story unfolds that we're going to talk about today, the Chlorophyll A standards are only looking at filamentous algae. That's the long seaweed algae that, if you throw your fishing lure out and you reel back a big glop of algae on your fishing lure, or if you're paddling and it's a heavy algal bloom that's going on, every paddle stroke you pick up just a big shovel full of algae. So these Chlorophyll A standards are only looking at filamentous algae from a recreational impact perspective. And so, and while we believe that's a good first start, we also believe that that's not enough, and that more needs to be done, and that we've been concerned about harmful algal blooms. And so as that work was progressing, we're still doing our Respect the Shenandoah campaign and taking photos and submitting it to DEQ and Virginia Department of Health. And here are some photos taken on July 14th over on the North Fork of the Shenandoah, showing heavy algal blooms. And so there's this, here's another one where the entire bottom is just blanketed. And then here's a third one. And those little blue, dark, blue or green sort of conical shapes, oftentimes those are indicative of blue-green algae residing on the river bottom. And so if we go back, so these were submitted on the 14th of July. On the 23rd of July, Virginia Department of Health, they issued the first ever harmful algal bloom on the Shenandoah River system. And initially this was going to be just in the Strasburg area, roughly, I don't know, a 5 to 7 to 10 mile stretch of the North Fork of the Shenandoah. And then, you ask yourself, well, why does it occur and these harmful algal blooms occur? And for harmful algal blooms to happen, you really need three things. You need low flow, you need plenty of nutrients, and the North Fork of the Shenandoah always has plenty of nutrients. In the Shenandoah Valley, we have roughly 180 million chickens, 18 million turkey, 500 plus thousand head of cattle. And all of that poultry litter and cattle manure needs to be dealt with. And when it's put on land where there's an agronomic need for it, it's great. It's an inexpensive fertilizer. But when it's put on already saturated land, then it just simply becomes a convenient waste disposal system. So here's a USGS chart for the Strasburg gauge, which is at the very bottom of the river gauge. And so roughly from June 19th, all the way through into August, you're seeing low flows, below the median daily statistic for roughly 100 years. And so you have this low flow, you have plenty of nutrients, you have very warm water temperatures, and then that results in the creation of these heavy algal blooms. And then just as another example of the nutrient loads that are being carried, we can look at Virginia nitrogen loads, and this is not just for the Shenandoah, this is for all Virginia rivers and streams, but you see this blue line that drops significantly over the last 10 years, and that's wastewater treatment plant improvements. And so you see dramatic improvements in wastewater treatment plant facilities, pulling nitrogen out of our rivers and streams. And then you go and you look at phosphorus and you see the same thing. But if you look at the orange line, that's agriculture. And you see little to no reduction in the amount of nitrogen being put into Virginia rivers and perennial streams. And then when you look at phosphorus loads in Virginia rivers and perennial streams, you only see the very smallest of reductions. And I would make the argument that the reductions that you do see in the phosphorus loads is a result of the legislation that was passed that got phosphorus out of bags of fertilizer from big box stores that you would buy in the spring from Lowe's and Home Depot and wherever. And then on the 10th of August, this advisory, it expanded from roughly 2 miles to 52.5 miles of the North Fork of the Shenandoah. And, a dramatic expansion, of this advisory, and to avoid contact with, these toxic algal mats, and that they were found up and down this 52.5 mile stretch. And obviously this caused a tremendous amount of alarm in the Shenandoah Valley. But in a weird way, I have to confess that I'm sort of happy about it, in the sense that it finally shows that Virginia DEQ and Virginia Department of Health, that they are paying attention to what's going on in the Shenandoah River system, and that these algal mats, have a harmful algal bloom component with cyanobacteria. And it's something that needs to be paid attention to, and that we need to start paying a lot more attention to. And so this, to me, is a demonstration of the two departments really starting to pay attention. And the other thing that went on with that is that this was a collaboration between DEQ pulling the water samples and Virginia Department of Health conducting the testing of the material. And so this isn't just a map showing the severity of it. Really, it starts down in just north of Edinburgh, and then it flows all the way north, and then east to Front Royal, where it joins the South Fork of the Shenandoah and creates the main stem of the Shenandoah. So, what are we doing about it, and what have we done about it? Well, we immediately put out a press release, and it was picked up by print and broadcast media, and it generated a lot of attention out here in the Shenandoah Valley about this, these harmful algal blooms and what we're experiencing on the Shenandoah. And it got a lot of attention out here. There any number of different articles, and then on social media we got roughly 10,000 hits. People were paying attention to what's going on out here in the valley. And then we also notified Uta Schneider with DEQ that the proposed chlorophyll A standards for filamentous algae, that it's not enough, that this is really a game changer, and that it's one thing if your recreational use and enjoyment of the river is impaired, that you go out and your fishing trip is your lures are all goobed up and everything else, but this has the potential to put human health, livestock health, pet health all at risk, and that the state really needs to be paying attention to these harmful algal blooms, and that we need a way to systematically address it. And just doing chlorophyll A for filamentous algae from a recreational impact is not enough. We also spoke with Ann Jennings, who is currently the acting Secretary of Natural Resources, and talked to her about what's going on and about some of the issues between DEQ and Virginia Department of Health and what needs to be done. And then on the 19th of August, we had a Zoom call with VDH and DEQ folks, talking about this harmful algal bloom advisory. And what really came out of the meeting is, a number of things. One is that DEQ and Virginia Department of Health, they are working hard to do the right thing. I don't want to direct any criticism at people or bureaucrats slacking or anything like that. It's not the case. They're trying to do the best that they can, but there are a couple of issues regarding this that are significant, and it impairs our ability to know more about these harmful algal blooms. One is that there is no freshwater harmful algal bloom budget, and so there was no money to do the testing. And so Virginia Department of Health, they essentially robbed Peter to pay Paul. and they pulled money out of their saltwater budget, their harmful algal bloom budget, and they used it for testing on the Shenandoah. They also don't have the ability to get out there on the river and to pull the samples. And so Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, they were the ones that actually pulled the samples, and so the testing could be conducted. But what's apparent in this is that all of this is reactive in nature as a result of submission of, these photographs, a lot of which came from our Respect the Shenandoah campaign, and that there is no systematic testing that occurs on the Shenandoah River system, and that it's completely event-based, meaning if they get a complaint, they'll go check it out. But if there is no complaint, they're not going to check anything out. And that there was also, it was apparent that there was no real clear methodology developed on how to lift the harmful algal bloom advisory. And on the North Fork, it does not receive as much recreational traffic on the river. The river tends to flow a little bit lower, a little bit slower, and so it's not as easy to canoe and kayak. But if this harmful algal bloom advisory had taken place on the South Fork of the Shenandoah, where there are any number of outfitters putting people on the river every day, in addition to all the B&Bs and Airbnbs and restaurants that rely upon people that enjoy recreating on the South Fork of the Shenandoah, it could have had a tremendous negative economic impact on the South Fork of the Shenandoah. Fortunately, it did not occur on the South Fork, but it occurred on the North Fork. And so really some of the takeaways is that there needs to be money put in place for harmful algal bloom testing for freshwater, that there needs to be resources put in place in terms of staffing, and there needs to be protocols and methodologies developed on what to do about these harmful algal blooms, because these are not going to go away. They're going to be with us. We're seeing algal blooms arrive earlier, stay longer, and be persistent throughout the entirety of the summer. And the nutrients are not going away, and our warm temperatures are not going away. And when you look at some of the studies on climate change and how it's manifesting itself in the mid-Atlantic and in the Chesapeake Bay region, you're seeing fairly wet springs followed by near drought conditions in the summer, broken up by these severe intense storms. And if we go back just very quickly if we go back to this, what you see that significant red line just at the beginning of September that shoots all the way up to 9,000, that's 9,000 CFS. And so it's important to look at this chart because this is a logarithmic chart, it's not to scale. And so you have CFS, cubic feet per second, the volume of water, almost at, below 100 or at 150, shoot from that to 9,000 CFS in the span of a couple of days. And so what we're seeing is climate change having these dramatic impacts. It was just announced today that they've run out of names for storms in the Atlantic because they've become so numerous. And so that's what we're sort of encountering here on the Shenandoah, and what needs to be done to start addressing it. We also spoke, we're getting attention from the General Assembly. We took Wendy Gidaitis out on the river and talked with her about what needs to be done to protect the Shenandoah. And then we met via Zoom with Director of DEQ, David Paler, and also talked with him about what's happening with these harmful algal blooms and the chlorophyll A standards, and how we need to be doing more to be tracking cyanobacteria, blue-green algae in the river than what we are currently doing. And so in terms of our next steps, we want to be meeting with key state senators and delegates to talk with them about these freshwater harmful algal blooms, what needs to be done, its impact on the recreational use and enjoyment of the river, as well as just on the economies out here in the Shenandoah Valley. Granted, agriculture, it generates $70 billion a year for the Commonwealth of Virginia. But, Virginia tourism and recreation, especially out here in the Shenandoah Valley, the river is just incredibly important, and that we need to be hiring staff. DEQ and Virginia Department of Health needs to be hiring staff to do the water quality monitoring and assist farmers to adopt these better management practices and take action against polluters. And also we need to be looking at these chlorophyll A standards I mentioned, and is there potential legislation that needs to be put in place in the next General Assembly to start systematically addressing these harmful algal blooms. And then, what do we need you to do? Well, quite honestly, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and we need all of you to contact your respective legislators and talk about the importance of funding for Virginia Department of Health and Department of Environmental Quality, and to have mechanisms put in place for systematic testing of these harmful algal blooms in a freshwater environment. Also, you can reach out to, as everyone knows, we had an election yesterday, to reach out to Governor-elect Youngkin about what needs to be done to protect our rivers and streams. And then later on this month, Sandra Mueller and Tara Wyrick are going to be on a call with our friends over at the Friends of the North Fork of the Shenandoah, talking about these nuisance algae issues in the Shenandoah. And I hope, and we're reaching out to them to also comment about harmful algal blooms, because in our opinion, the harmful algal blooms are becoming even more important. And then, obviously, like I just mentioned, we had an election for governor, as well as the House of Delegates, and Governor-elect Youngkin has really said very little about his environmental policies. When you read his literature, he just talks about, we need to be good partners for Virginia farmers and make Virginia the most farm-friendly place in America. But what's even of more significance than Governor-elect Youngkin taking office is the Republicans, it looks like, are taking control of the House of Delegates by a very narrow margin. And out here in the Shenandoah Valley, Todd Gilbert, he is the delegate in the 15th District, Republican. He's going to be playing a major role in the House of Delegates. It's not clear if he's going to become Speaker of the House or if he'll remain as a House Majority Leader, but he will become a significant player in the House of Delegates, and its impact upon water quality protection and money being made available to be looking at these issues. And so that's something that we definitely need to be paying attention to. And then also there are going to be new department heads, new secretaries for Department of Natural Resources and Agricultural, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources over in the House, and then possible a new DEQ director. I say possible only because David Paylor seems to have more lives in Rasputin, and has served in that position in both Republican and Democratic governorships, and who knows what's gonna happen. And so obviously this is just all taken place in the last not even 24 hours, and these are just certainly sort of top level thoughts, but in a nutshell, this is what's going on out here in the valley with these harmful algal blooms, and what's being done and what we need to be doing about it. So I'll just turn it over to folks, or to Emily or Philip, to for any questions.
Philip, is there anything you wanted to add before we go over to questions?
I think Mark covered it really well. I'd be interested to hear what questions people have, and I'll weigh in. If people have more questions about how the regulations work and our litigation, happy to answer those. But I'm looking forward to hearing what our listeners thought. Thanks.
All right, so first question, which is touched on a little bit, but I don't know if you want to add anything, Mark. What are the toxic effects to us when we touch the algae or swim in the water?
Yeah, on harmful algal blooms, there can be blue-green algae and it can be non-toxic. But scientists are doing a lot of research on why. But if it is releasing toxins, it has the ability to either give you gastrointestinal issues. You could get gastrointestinal issues, and what all that means. It can also create skin rashes, and blue-green algae with cyanobacteria in it is also really dangerous for pets. Dogs especially, they have an amazing ability to ingest water and have it rapidly absorbed into their system. And so if you have a dog running around and runs down to the river and happens to take a big drink of water, in an eddy where there is lots of this algae, right there, it has potential to get very sick and even to die from it. And so people need to be paying particular attention to their pets. It has, impacts potentially for livestock. I mean, we've been working very hard to get livestock out of the river, and we're very proud of the work that we've done. But if a herd happens to go down into the river and drinks this water where there are toxins present, it could make your herd sick. And then finally, if people are swimming in the river, tubing in the river, especially little munchkins, little kids, oftentimes, they're swimming and they get a mouthful of water that they ingest, and it'd be very easy for them to start vomiting or to get diarrhea or gastrointestinal issues. And so it can really run the gamut. Worst case scenario is what we saw a few years back up on Lake Erie, where there were these, steady progressive winds pushing all this blue-green algae toward the city of Toledo, and they had to close their water intakes for 3 days because they were unable to handle the volume of this blue-green algae. And even over here on the North Fork of the Shenandoah this year, you saw communities getting concerned, and they expressed that tension and some of the frustration in news articles about, even after they processed their water, they were still detecting small amounts in amounts under EPA standards, but amounts nonetheless of cyanobacteria in drinking water. And so now you're seeing, the town of Winchester wanting to pull water out of the main stem of the Shenandoah. You're seeing the same thing up in Harrisonburg, where they are in the process of building pipework to get water out of the South Fork and not rely on the North Fork of the Shenandoah. And the other towns, Strasburg and Woodstock and Edinburgh, are all looking at ways to expand their drinking water through quarries and other options to try to protect their drinking water.
Great. Next question. So how do the South Branch and Main Stem compare? I assume, how do they compare to the North Branch?
Yeah, well, the North Fork of the Shenandoah, it is a much smaller drainage and watershed, and so it makes it more susceptible to the creation of these harmful algal blooms. There was some water quality testing that did take place on the South Fork of the Shenandoah by Virginia Department of Health, and they did not, on their limited testing that they did do, they did not discover any harmful algal blooms. Part of it is volume. When you have so much, these nutrients, it's nitrogen and phosphorus, getting spilled into the water, and then when you have a relatively low water level, low volume of water, it concentrates those nutrients and makes it, along with the warm water temperatures and sunlight, makes it much easier for these harmful algal blooms to emerge. But we have taken Alan Lehman, our program manager. He's taken any number of photographs of what we believed were harmful algal blooms in the past, seasons over on the South Fork, that did not get tested and went untested. But we do know that when we went in to take these photographs, we had to literally hold our breath because the ammonia smell was so strong, the off-gassing of these algal blooms, in order to take these photographs. So I believe that harmful algal blooms have occurred on the South Fork of the Shenandoah as well as on the main stem. It's just that they have not been formally recognized as such, and an advisory has not been put out about them.
I agree. And just a quick additional note. I mean, that's why, when Mark was talking about, where we need your support and what kind of actions we plan to take in the future, one of the things we need to look at is the reason we need more funding for these agencies and a clearer roles for these agencies in responding to algal blooms is so that they can go out and monitor more carefully. And as Mark just said, we're very concerned that there probably have been harmful algal blooms in the South Fork and potentially in the main stem. We don't know, but because this is a complaint-driven system, they only go out when people report these blooms, and because over this past summer we learned they just don't have the resources to really comprehensively respond through the river in a wide area. That's a big concern to us. So we the state, we think the interest is there. Certainly the staff at the Department of Health and DEQ, as Mark said, want to do good work and they want to protect the public. They need resources and potentially legislative clarification of who is required to respond and when, to really address these things more fully. Thanks.
Great, thanks guys. Next question, is it possible for volunteers to perform accurate testing?
I mean, to do the testing, it requires a lab in order to do it. And then we're also very cautious and concerned about having willing volunteers that want to do the right thing and to help the river come down to the river and inadvertently come into contact with a harmful algal bloom, and they're standing there grabbing water samples in their shorts and sandals, and they go out 3 or 4 feet to get it, and they've come in contact, and now they put themselves at risk. And so that's why we would prefer to have harmful algal blooms be tested by the departments trained to do that work, and that's why we need that additional funding. I would not encourage people on their own, if they smell an algal bloom, to just go in and start pulling samples on their own and inadvertently put themselves or their kids or their pets at risk by doing so.
And I think just to build on Mark's answer, honestly, the best thing that the public can do, and that people that are on this call and are supporters and interested in these issues, is document what they're seeing. And so Mark mentioned this app, the Water Reporter, that we use, and that's tied to our website and our Respect the Shenandoah campaign. If folks are out near the river or on the river and they see whether they think it's a harmful algal bloom or it's just a very large, what we call a nuisance algal bloom, lots of algae in the water, it's gross, it smells bad, whatever, document that. Use your phone camera, take pictures of it, use the Water Reporter app, send us photos, and that's the best way that we can get the state involved and really get more attention to this, is to document what's going on. Because as Mark said, we have a very small staff. We have I think 11 people on our staff. Mark and Alan Lehman, who's the program manager and who does a lot of our algal monitoring and files the algae reports, they're just 2 people out in the entire Shenandoah Valley doing this on our staff. So the more help we have from the public kind of documenting this problem, the better off, and the more chance we're going to have to really push solutions. So
yeah, and one of the criticisms of the DQ Shenandoah Algae methodology study that they started back a few years ago is that they were only looking at 5 locations on the Shenandoah, 2 on the North Fork, 2 on the South Fork, and I believe 1 on the main stem, and they were going there periodically to do visual examinations and to take samples and to do that. But unfortunately, these algal blooms, I mean, in the Strasburg area, the North Fork of the Shenandoah, they do often occur there, quite honestly. But there are lots of other locations where they occur where they are not within visual eyesight of a boat ramp or access point. And the only way that they're going to be discovered or to be attention drawn to them is by people paddling and recreating and using the river system and taking the time to capture photographs and get photographic evidence of the exact location of where these occur, and submit it to either to us or to DEQ and to Virginia Department of Health. These harmful algal blooms, it's kind of creepy in the way that the river can be fine, and in 1 or 2 days, an entire harmful algal bloom will just erupt out of a pool of water, and it can disappear almost as quickly. And so it's very time urgent that attention is drawn to these while that they are there, and you're not going to be able to get a complete picture just by going to a set number of locations, 4 or 5 locations. There needs to be a much better systematic examination of the river system to know what's actually going on in the river.
Great, thanks guys. So next question, can farmers be supported to convert to agroecology?
Philip, do you want to take that, or do you want me to hop on? Or
I'm not sure what that actually means. I have to be honest. So I don't know, Mark.
Well, I do know. I mean, we've been working very hard with the General Assembly for the WIP 3, the Watershed Implementation Plan, the 3rd iteration, has roughly $65 million for agricultural best management practices to get cattle out of the river, to improve to improve nutrient management plans, to improve best management practices, the installation of riparian buffers, so that trees and bushes and native vegetation capture these nutrients before they spill into the river. So there has been a tremendous amount of work that has gone on in the General Assembly in the last few sessions to do just that. And you're also seeing young farmers coming in from, they do their college work at Virginia Tech or some of the other Virginia institutions, and they come away, or they're entering the work in the field with a much better appreciation of the role that the farmer plays in protecting not just the water, but also their soil, and what can they do to protect their soil. And so it's a complex issue, but it's in the farmer's interest to protect their soil. If the water is leaving their soil and their land, it's also taking sediment and good topsoil off their land. And so it's in their interest to protect their soil and also protect the river.
Great, thanks. Sorry, just going back up. Next question, is it safe to kayak in the main stem down toward Berryville and beyond?
We kayak, we paddle all the time, but to give someone a definitive answer that, and we're really sort of the question, or maybe mixing E. coli bacteria, with these harmful algal blooms. They're 2 separate things. And so you could have no harmful algal bloom occurring, and it's still unsafe because the E. coli levels could be so dramatically high. And so there is some testing that goes on. The Friends of the Shenandoah River, Karen Anderson, she does testing at I believe it's 13 different locations regarding E. coli. And so I really am unable to give a direct answer of yes, it's safe, or no, it's not safe. I encourage people that if there's a high water event, it doesn't even need to be a flood, but just a high water event where the river jumps a foot or 2 up, I would lay off the river for 48 to 72 hours. That's often when a lot of the bacteria and the E. coli levels spike. And then if you're in the river and you're paddling and you see, regardless of where you are, if you see a large algal bloom, like a large mat of algae, you don't know if it's a harmful algal bloom or if it's just a big algal bloom, but I would tend to avoid it and paddle around it. And if you smell it, especially in your tubing or something like that, I would encourage, you, yourself, your family, friends to get out of the river and to walk the shoreline and get down below it. And then before you get back in the river, but don't just, just swim and float through this harmful algal bloom that smells.
Great. Okay, so next question. What are options, if any, for alternate funding to remediate or lower nutrient loads?
I can start to answer that if you like. So Mark mentioned this before, but one of the statewide legislative kind of elements of this that we've been working on for a long time is to make sure that there is what's called cost share funding. So make sure there is basically state grants or state loans that come out of the state budget to help farmers pay for either some or in some cases all of the cost of what we call these best management practices to reduce nutrient pollution. So this ranges from giving farmers money, providing them money and resources to build fencing to keep their cows out of the river. And so that has a lot of benefit because cows not only they go directly in the river, they defecate, right, and go to the bathroom in the river, so they're direct pollution. They also, when cows are going in and out of a stream, as many of you know if you live out in the valley, they do a lot of damage to the stream bank and to that riparian area along the stream that's so important to preserve that, to keep the water quality in good shape. And so money for cattle fencing, money to hire kind of certified planners who can help farmers figure out how much fertilizer to put on their fields. So a lot of the nutrient pollution that we see and that we know is going into the Shenandoah and other rivers in Virginia is from what's called over application, basically using too much fertilizer, too much manure on farm fields, using it at the wrong time in the wintertime when it's not going to be absorbed or it's going to run off from storms. And if there's a huge rainstorm or a big storm event, or if the soil is already saturated with these nutrients like phosphorus, then that excess is going to run off and end up in the river and cause that. So nutrient management planning is the kind of term of art, the wonky term that we use to kind of figure out how much fertilizer is good and when too much is when they should stop from using that. And the source of a lot of this fertilizer, when I say that term, is those 175 million chickens that are grown in the Shenandoah every year produce, as you can imagine, a huge volume of manure or poultry litter. And that is, it's a resource if it's used properly. It becomes pollution if it's used improperly, right? It becomes a waste product. And so a lot of what we're doing at the state level and what the state had tried to do under Governor Northam is figure out ways to use that more effectively, give farmers subsidies to transport that manure out of an area that has too much of it, where it can be used in other parts of the state. So those are the main goals, trying to provide resources to farmers because they do operate on tight margins, to just manage these resources better so we're not seeing this nutrient pollution. That's really the key, because I think Mark showed a graph early in his presentation, and there's a very telling statistic from the state government from Virginia. Basically, in order for the state to meet its goals of reducing nutrient pollution to help clean up Chesapeake Bay, 72% of the remaining reduction in nutrients has to come from farmers. It's just a fact. And so we have a long way to go when it comes to nutrient pollution from farm fields, and we're seeing the effects of it, unfortunately, in the Shenandoah, all summer. So
great. So the next question is, how difficult and expensive is monitoring?
Well, I mean, monitoring for harmful algal blooms, I mean, it's expensive. You DEQ or VDH would need to have the staff able to get out there and to be pulling the samples, and to do it in a systematic fashion. And quite honestly, if we would try to go to the General Assembly and say we need more money for testing on the Shenandoah River, it would fail. And so it needs to be done on a, at a state level. So there would need to be testing for freshwater rivers and perennial streams. Delegates and senators on the James River, on the Rappahannock River, on the York, everywhere and anywhere, would probably not support something that was earmarked and targeted just for the Shenandoah. And then, one of the challenges that came out in the discussion that we had on the 19th of August with VDH and DEQ is that the lab that they were using for testing for these harmful algal blooms, they informed VDH that they would no longer conduct the testing because of the challenges involved in handling the material. And so the state needs to identify a new lab or new labs that have the wherewithal to conduct the testing and can make this happen. So there are a number of challenges involved in doing systematic testing. And so the expenses would be
in the millions of dollars,
Yeah.
I'm thinking. Yeah. And also I'm not sure if the question was also maybe related to kind of citizen monitoring. If you can theoretically, either our staff or you could train researchers know how to collect potentially harmful algal blooms successfully. That algae would have to be collected and the water samples collected, then sent to a lab that could do the analysis. That would cost quite a bit too. I would think it would cost at least $1,000 per sample, and that's once you have people trained to do it. So, the other thing we want to keep in mind when we do our citizen monitoring, I think I mentioned the water quality monitoring to test for bacteria levels. We have a lab on our main vessel on the Potomac where we analyze those samples, but we go through a very, very detailed process of having that lab certified. It was just actually recertified by the state of Virginia to take those samples. And the reason you want that kind of certification is then when we take those samples and we have that data about water quality and bacteria levels, we can actually send that to the state, and they're required to accept that, and they have to use that data or consider that data when they're making new regulations on water quality, or they're reviewing their current standards on bacteria levels. So, if we wanted to down the road do our own sampling for algae or train volunteers to do it, we want to make sure we do that in the best way possible and have to be able to send that to a lab and things like that. And we are also looking at kind of new technology that might help us do a simpler detection of whether there are, technology that could help us, say, take a sample and determine if there are cyanotoxins in that water sample or in that algae. Those are under development. We have a wonderful committee on our board that's actually looking at, whether there are tools out there that we could use to kind of at least get if not the level of algae, but at least give us a kind of an up or down signal on whether what we're seeing is toxic or not. So I think you'll hear more from us on that in the future. Right now, we don't have those tools available, but we're looking into that very carefully.
Great. Okay, next question. Is there opportunity to document historic algal blooms using satellite images?
I know that there's on some of the satellite images, there's God, I'm going brain dead on the type of sensor it is, but it's a sort of a photographic spectrum technology, and there's some indication that on those photos that these harmful algal blooms, the cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, it emits a certain wavelength, on the color spectrum, but what has been holding it back in the past is that those satellites and that imagery is at such a level. I mean, its level of resolution is, maybe 10 meters, 20 meters, and so you're talking 36 to 60 feet in resolution, and so it's really not where we would need it to be to get a photo of the Shenandoah River. And it's not to say that it can't take place yet, but I think that more work needs to be done. I think that the United Nations is spending more money looking at the role of harmful algal blooms in drinking water, and I believe that they're also looking at the use of satellites to try to do some of that as well. But I'm not certain about its ability to take historical photographs and discern information from them. But going forward, that may be possible.
Cool. Okay, great. We've got time for one last question here. So what could be possible incentives for farmers to keep their animals out of the rivers and install riparian buffers?
Well, I mean, the bottom line for a lot of farmers is money. And there have been any number of studies done that herds that are kept out of the river, they grow faster, they produce more beef on the hoof, so to speak. They avoid a lot of these waterborne illnesses, mastitis and things of that nature. And so you see somebody like Bobby Whitescarver down on Middle River, a very successful cattle rancher, keeping his cattle herds out, very healthy. And then there are funds available for cost share and management to put in stream exclusionary fencing, alternative watering sources for the cattle herds, and also for installation of riparian buffers as well. And also some of that money is now being made available for upkeep and maintenance of the fencing, in addition to just the installation of it.
Great. Well, it's going to be illegal, right? There's a law that was passed in Virginia.
Well, House Bill 1422 that passed last year, the year before, it calls for all cattle herds to be removed from Virginia rivers and perennial streams by the end of 2025. And so at that point, if at the end of 2025, the incoming governor and the Secretary of Natural Resources and Agriculture will make a determination to see if those regulations need to be mandated and required to have them out of the river. So yeah, it calls for that, but who was it, Churchill, that said that two things you never want to see being made are sausage and laws. And when you get into the guts of the law, it's a little squishier than what we would prefer.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Okay, awesome. I think we'll kind of conclude there. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Don't forget to consider making a donation to Potomac Riverkeeper Network. Obviously, we do a lot of work on the Shenandoah, and obviously a lot of work on the Potomac River as well too, protecting clean water. And ensuring that you can recreate safely. So yeah, make a donation. We have volunteer, opportunities in the spring, not so much during the late fall and winter. So take a look at that. And we'll have other Water Wednesdays on different topics coming up. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Now let us go there, unless you guys have anything else to say.
Great. Thank you, everyone,
for joining. Yeah, thanks. We appreciate your interest. All right.
Great. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.